Good morning. Last week we began a series dealing with the overloads of life, and I think what we discovered, if you were here, is we're an overloaded people. We're overloaded financially, we're overloaded emotionally, we're overloaded spiritually, we're overloaded physically and emotionally and relationally, and those things keep us going. It's like a snowball. It keeps piling up and getting bigger and getting more momentum. And sometimes we find a hard time keeping up with it. And being overloaded prevents us from investing ourselves in the things that last and the things that are important. How many of us take a break and stop and think, wow, I'd much rather be sharing this time with my family than working this overtime so I can pay for the boat that I never get to use. Overload prevents us from investing ourselves in the most important things in life. And overloaded people, man, they run. They get up, they hit the ground running, and they run all day long. And when the end of the day comes, they look back on what they've done in the course of the day, and they wonder if they've accomplished anything of value at all. Do you know anybody like that? You know, I haven't been around anybody on their deathbed that ever said, Devin, you know, I wish I'd worked more. That's never happened. And anytime you begin the conversation about overload, you can't get too deep into that conversation. In fact, you can't go through that whole conversation without talking about stress. According to the American Institute of Stress, 4 out of 5 Americans reported that they are overloaded with stress. And stress-related illnesses cost the American economy over $100 billion a year. Stress is big stuff. Many things can raise our stress level. Stress can be induced by changes in life. Stress can be brought on by expectations that other people have upon us. Stress can be induced by our relationships, by physical illness, and also by many other causes. This morning, we're going to examine these words of Jesus that Luke read just a moment ago. We're going to look and see what he tells us about unloading the stress in our life. And the first thing that we need to see this morning, we need to learn, is that stress is a natural part of life. Jesus tells us, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. That's what Jesus says. He says it's a natural part of our life. Now, notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, don't worry about any of this stuff because you're a believer. Don't expect your life to be easy because you made the decision to follow me. Jesus doesn't tell us to avoid stress. And the reason why is because stress is a natural part of our life. What he does tell us is that we shouldn't respond to stress in our lives by worrying or becoming anxious about it. And you may be saying to yourself this morning, well, that's a whole lot easier said than done. When Jesus says, do not worry, these are not words of encouragement. These are not friendly words of advice. In the original language, in the Greek language as it was written, this is written in the imperative sense. And what it means is that Jesus is not giving us a friendly request. He is giving us a godly command. Do not worry. In verse 32, Jesus tells his listeners that when we worry about the things of life, when we worry about what we're going to eat, we worry about what we're going to wear, we're no different than the pagans. You know, we've been called to be the light of the world. We've been called to be the salt of the earth. We're supposed to stand out. We're supposed to be different. And what Jesus says here is that when we worry about these things, we're no different than the pagans. We don't stand out. When we allow ourselves to worry, in essence, what Jesus is saying is that we're acting like someone who has no faith. Now again, that's hard to deal with. That's hard to hear. That's hard for us to accept, isn't it? Don't worry. It's easy for us to tell somebody else not to worry. But when we try to tell ourselves, don't worry, and someone else tells us, don't worry, it's not that easy for us to accept that at face value. because it's something totally different when we have to do it. We've been conditioned to think that we don't have any choice as to how we respond and deal with the stressful things of life. We've been conditioned by our society to respond to these situations with anger, with depression, with anxiety and distress. Based upon Jesus' words in this passage, we have a clear choice, a very clear choice, as to how to respond to the stressful situations in our life. We have one of two choices. We can worry about it, or we can have faith in God. It really is no more complicated than that. We can respond in faith, or we can choose to worry about it. And Jesus' imperative and loving command to us this morning is, don't worry. Second, unloading our stress means that we understand and accept that some things are beyond our control. In verse 27, Jesus asks a very profound question. He says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? Do you know that Jesus is the only person who's ever lived that could legitimately ask that question? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? Jesus is the only person, the only human being that's ever walked the earth that could add an hour to his life. But do you understand what he's saying? And in this question, Jesus reminds us that all of our stress and all of our worry is unproductive. It's a waste of time and a waste of energy. You know, over the course of time, I've counseled a lot of people, and they have a lot of worries. And the first question I'll ask someone when they come for counseling about an issue that they're dealing with, the first question I'll ask them is, can you do anything about it? Can you alter the outcome? Can you change it? And many times, more often than not, the answer is, no, I can't. I can't do anything about it. I can't change it. That's why I'm here. Well, my response is always, don't worry about it. Why, it's easy, isn't it? No, it's not. It's not easy. We don't need to worry about the things that we can't control. We can minimize stress in some of our areas. There's things that we can work on. We can minimize the stress, but regardless, there will always be things in our life that's beyond our control, that we can't do anything about. We throw away a lot of our life worrying about things that we can't change, that are beyond our control. When this happens, we need to redirect our focus. We need to channel our focus on those things we can control, and then recognize those things that we can't and lay them at the feet of Jesus and let Him handle them. Third, we can learn a lot from creation about unloading our stress. Verse 26, Jesus says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? When life becomes a little too complicated, when we find ourselves more at worry than at peace, we need to get away. We need to step back. We need to reassess what's going on in our life and recognize things for what they are. We need to step away from that. If you remember, that's exactly what Jesus did. We talked about this last week. There were times when Jesus came to his disciples and said, okay, fellas, let's go get in the boat. We're going to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee so we can get away from it all. And it was a specific, purposed thing that they did so that they could refocus on what's important. And sometimes we have to do that as well. We need to stop and smell the flowers sometimes. We need to stop and look at the birds, and we need to look at the stars. Go out in the backyard and look at those beautiful stars out there and get an understanding of who we really are and who God really is. And when we do all of that, and we realize that God takes care of this world, and He does a pretty good job. And then we read what Jesus says in verse 26, are you not much more valuable than they? It puts everything back into perspective, doesn't it? And it reaffirms Jesus' loving and imperative command to us. Don't worry. Don't worry. also unloading our stress means redirecting our stress. It means redirecting our stress from stressful situations that we have into God's providential promises that He makes to all of us. Verse 33, Jesus gives us His alternative to dealing with the stressful times in life. Listen to what He says. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. See, Jesus tells us in times of stress, we need to redirect our focus. We need to take a focus off of ourselves and off of our problems, and that means that we need to focus on God's sufficiency rather than on our problems. It means that we should trust His providence. It means that we should have confidence in His plan that He has for us in spite of the pain that we feel and in spite of the fear that God isn't working at all. And when this happens, we need to rediscover 3 characteristics of God that we should never forget. First, we should never forget that God is holy. James tells us in chapter 1, verses 13 and 17, God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does He tempt anyone. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like the shifting shadows. What James is emphasizing here, and what we need to understand this morning, is that God is consistent. He's consistent with His goodness. We have good days, we have bad days. God is consistently good, and He is consistently good for His promises. Second, we should never forget that God is great. The circumstances that cause us the most stress are not stressful. God is never handcuffed or limited by any circumstance. And He has never been in any situation where He was helpless, even when He was on the cross. Do you remember God's question to Abraham? God had come to Abraham earlier and said, I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. In other words, Abraham, I know you're an old guy, and Sarah's, not a spring chicken anymore, but trust me, your descendants are going to be there. You're going to run out of sand before you run out of kids. That was quite a promise. And some time went by, if you remember. And Abraham began to wonder about the promise. And God came to him and said in Genesis chapter 18, verse 14, is anything too hard for God? Think about what you're dealing with today. I don't know what you're dealing with. I don't know what stresses you have. I don't know what issues you're dealing with. I don't know what mountains of problems lay before you. But you need to ask yourself, and I need to ask myself, the same question that God asked Abraham to ask himself. Is anything too hard for God? You know what the reality is? We never get to the question. We do everything we can through ourselves, through other people, before we ever go to God and we ask the question. We try to make it work our way. And God simply asks Abraham to look at something that seems impossible and insurmountable and ask a very simple question. Is anything too hard for God? We need to ask that question. Third, we should never forget that God is loving. You know, the deist view that God simply wound up the world and set it out there in the universe and is just waiting for it to unwind and then everything will be over, that God is not involved in our life, that God isn't lovingly concerned with what goes on with us in our daily lives is completely false. That is a false view of God. God is very concerned. God is not some indifferent bystander to our life. God has redeemed us by His involvement in our life in the most intimate way. He went to a cross for us. And He never turns a deaf ear to our cries of pain. You ever seen a child take on something that was a little bit bigger than what they could handle? And you know, but you're watching. And you watch that kid struggle with it and pull at it, and then they start getting mad. Usually starts with a big sigh. And then you can see that frown come on, and they start to turn red. It's usually on the tips of their ears. And they start getting red, and they start fussing, and they start throwing a fit. Now you know they're mad. And then you go up, because you've been watching, and you say, son, would you like a little help with that? Or sweetheart, would you like a hand with that? No. Not even looking at you, pushing away. No. I'm going to do it. Okay. And then you step back and you watch a little bit more as they continue to get more and more frustrated and get upset. You know, sometimes they take our help. Sometimes they accept our help. And you know what? Sometimes they choose to stay miserable. You know, that's the way it is with us sometimes. Sometimes we choose to stay miserable. Many times when we're outmatched by life, God offers us help. And He offers us help in many different ways. He offers us help through other people. But we're bent on doing it ourselves and doing it our way. And all the time, God's there waiting to let us be helped by Him. Stress is a part of our life. And Jesus never promised a stress-free life. But there are some things that we can do to minimize the stress with the situations that we face. First, we can be thankful. You know, when we choose to be thankful, it lifts the stress off of us. When we choose to be thankful and redirect our focus on the things that are being done for us rather than the things that we think are being done to us, life gets a little bit better. Life is better when we count our blessings than when we count our struggles. Second, we can focus on others. When we get involved in the lives of others and we get occupied and preoccupied with the things that are going on in the lives of others, it takes the focus off of our troubles. And something that we figure out pretty quickly is, number one, we're not the only ones that have problems. And number two, there are people out there who have a lot bigger problems than we're dealing with. Third, we need to laugh. Laughter is the pressure release valve of our soul. We need to laugh. Laughter eases the pressure. It helps us to release tension. And it helps us to put things into perspective. I hope that each and every one of us has somebody in our life that can make us laugh. Because no matter how bad your day is going, or how rotten you feel like your life is going, or how big the problems seem to be, there's usually one person in your life that they can just look at you the right way, and you lose it. You just start laughing. I hope you have someone like that in your life. And if you do, find that person and tell them to fill your prescription. Fourth, we need to pray. And we need to pray some more. We need to bear our heart to God, because when our life is overloaded, our soul is overloaded as well. And we unload the overload of our soul through prayer. That's the way God designed it. God designed it that way so that we can unload the things that bother us the most. And really, there is no other way to do it. There is no other way to really unload your soul other than to pray to God. And God can handle our tears. God can handle our frustration, and God can handle our anger. But let me tell you something this morning. God can't handle anything that we don't give to Him. Fifth, we need to be in the Word. Conversation with God is a two-way street. He's given us the gift of prayer so that we can just unload everything on Him. But you know what? It's not really fair if He can't talk to us, right? So after we've unloaded our soul on Him, He lovingly, through His Word, gives us His counsel. And He deserves to be listened to through His Word after all that He's done for us. We need to see our worries and our stress as opportunities for God rather than problems for us. And think about it for just a second. What would happen in our life if we minimized as much of the stress as we can the things that we can handle, the things that we can deal with, that we control, and turn the rest of it over to God, what would happen in our life? What would happen if we redirected our focus from seeing these things as being beyond our control to being in the complete control of God? How would our life change? Our faith would grow exponentially. You know, we say that God is great, but how often do we give Him the opportunity to prove His greatness? We're going to have stress in our life. It's a part of living. It's the way that it is. But what we choose to do with the stress in our life will determine whether or not it destroys us or whether it deepens us. And again, this morning I have no clue what you're dealing with. I don't know what problems you're facing. I don't know what worries you have. I don't know what's stressing you out. But I do know this. Something is. Because we're all affected by it. And what we need to do is ask the same question that Abraham was asked to give to God. Is anything too hard for God? The thing that you're worried about, the thing that's keeping you up at night, the thing that's causing that gnaw in your stomach, call it an ulcer. Can you do anything about it? Can you stop it? Can you change it? Can you affect the outcome of it at all? Can, as Jesus said, worrying add a single hour to your life or change the outcome of that situation at all? If yes, then do something about it. Have the courage to do something about it. Ask for God to give you the strength to do something about it. But if you can't, have the courage and the faith in God to turn loose of it and let Him have it, because He's in control of it. Maybe you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters today to do that. That's why we're here. That's one of the reasons why the church exists, to bear one another's burdens. We want to pray with you. We want to pray for you. Maybe this morning, the greatest burden that you have and the greatest worry and concern that you have when you're willing to step back and think about it for the reality that it is your own mortality. None of us are getting out of here alive. I hate to break it to you. Now the question is, when the Lord returns, A, or we go to meet Him, B, are we going to meet Him confidently knowing that He's our Savior, more so than our judge? Are we going to stand before God, before the Father, the judge of us all, by ourselves, or will Jesus be standing there next to us, saying, I've got that one covered, and I covered that one with my blood, and yes, he has been forgiven, and she has been forgiven of all things. Well done, my good and faithful child. Do you have that confidence this morning? If not, maybe it's time to get it. Maybe you need to be baptized into Christ today. Have your sins washed away and walk in newness of life. Maybe as a Christian, you're not living as confidently as you should. And you need to repent of that and ask that God forgive you so that you can live confidently as Jesus died to give you. Maybe today you're looking for a church home. Looking for a place where you can be loved, where you can be encouraged, and where you can be an encourager to others. We would love to have you as a part of our family here at the Surprise Church of Christ. If you have a need today of any kind, don't leave here today without that need being filled. Together while we stand.